The stone gates of Drakkar Hold cracked open at midnight, and 12 warriors stepped through the mist without a single word spoken between them. Torches lined the path ahead, flickering against black armor that had never known defeat. General Edric Voss walked at the front, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the dark road that led south, toward the human lands. Behind him marched 11 of the finest fighters the Mountain Kingdom had ever raised, each one chosen not for loyalty or wisdom, but for the number of enemies they had already crushed beneath their boots. Inside the great hall above the gate, the Elder Council watched from a high window, their faces lit by dying candlelight. Councilwoman Elira Thorne gripped the stone sill so hard her knuckles turned pale. She was the only one among them who had not voted to send the warriors out that night. Everyone else had agreed with General Voss, who insisted that the humans spreading across the borderlands needed to be reminded, once and for all, who truly ruled these mountains. They are just men and women with spears, Voss had said only hours earlier, standing tall in the council chamber, his voice echoing off carved stone walls. We have faced giants. We have faced storms of fire. We have faced creatures older than this, hold itself. What can farmers and traders possibly do against warriors like mine? No one in that room had an answer strong enough to stop him, not even Elira, though something cold and unfamiliar had settled in her chest the moment the vote was cast. She had lived long enough to know that confidence, when left unchecked, had a way of becoming the very thing that destroyed a person. But pride was a language the council spoke fluently, and doubt was a tongue none of them wished to learn. Now, as she watched the 12 figures disappear into the fog beyond the gate, she whispered a single sentence to herself, one she would repeat many times over the coming weeks. May the mountain remember what we sent it to do. The road south twisted through pine forests, thick with shadow, then opened into wide valleys, where rivers cut silver lines across the land. The warriors moved quickly, covering distance that would have taken ordinary travelers 3 times as long. They did not rest often. They did not speak often. Each of them carried the weight of the Drakkar name, and each of them believed, without question, that the mission ahead would be simple. Among them walked Garrick Bellamy, a broad-shouldered fighter, known across the hold for ending duels in a single strike. Beside him marched Nora Whitfield, the only woman among the 12, whose calm expression hid a reputation for outlasting every opponent she had ever faced, not through speed, but through patience that unsettled even seasoned warriors. Further back walked Owen Castellan, the youngest of the group, still eager to prove himself worthy of standing among legends. On the 3rd night of their journey, the warriors made camp beside a wide, slow river. Garrick built the fire, while Owen kept watch at the tree line, his young eyes scanning shapes that were probably nothing more than branches swaying in the wind. General Voss sat apart from the others, sharpening a blade that did not need sharpening, his mind turning over the plan he intended to carry out once they reached the first human settlement. You are quiet tonight, Nora said, settling beside him with the ease of someone who had marched beside him for over a decade. More than usual. I am thinking about how easy this will be, Voss replied, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. The scouts say the settlement ahead has perhaps 200 people, farmers, builders, a handful of guards with dull blades. We could clear the entire village before sunrise if we wished. Then why does something in your voice sound like doubt? Voss did not answer right away. He stared into the fire, watching orange light dance across his weathered hands. Because I have fought giants who roared before they struck. I have fought creatures with claws longer than swords. I understand strength when it stands in front of me, but I have never fought something that smiles while it studies you, and the reports from our scouts describe humans who smile. Nora said nothing more. She simply nodded, understanding a feeling she too could not quite name. Far to the south, in a settlement called Bramwell, life continued exactly as it always had, calm and unaware of the storm marching toward it. Children ran between wooden houses chasing a scruffy dog. Farmers loaded carts with grain for the morning market. Blacksmiths hammered metal into plows rather than blades, because Bramwell had no need for weapons of war, or so it seemed. At the center of the settlement stood a modest hall where the town's leaders gathered each evening to discuss matters both large and small. That night, a young messenger arrived breathless at the door, having run nearly 10 miles without stopping. Warriors, the boy gasped, bracing himself against the doorframe. 12 of them, coming from the mountains, armor black as coal, moving faster than any group of travelers should. The hall fell silent. Then, from the head of the long wooden table, a woman named Eleanor Brightwood rose slowly to her feet. She was neither the strongest nor the loudest voice in Bramwell, but she was, without question, the wisest. Years spent traveling as a young woman, learning the customs and languages of distant lands, had shaped her into someone who understood that battles were not always won with steel.
"How many days until they arrive?" she asked calmly. "3, maybe less."
Eleanor turned to the gathered leaders, her expression steady despite the tension rippling through the room. "Then we have 3 days to prepare something far more powerful than swords." A farmer named Daniel Ashworth frowned deeply. "Eleanor, if these are truly Drakkar warriors, no plow or plan will stop them. We have heard the old stories. They do not lose battles." "I did not say we would fight them," Eleanor replied, her eyes calm but sharp. "I said we would prepare something more powerful than swords. There is a difference, Daniel, and it may be the very thing that saves every person in this settlement." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through fields of wheat that swayed like a golden sea beneath the darkening sky. None of the villagers slept easily that night, yet none of them ran either. Instead, candles burned late in every window of Bramwell, as its leaders began weaving together a plan, built not on strength, but on understanding an enemy they had never met. 2 days later, the 12 warriors crested a hill overlooking the valley, where Bramwell sat nestled between golden fields and a winding river. General Voss raised a hand, signaling his warriors to halt. Below them, smoke curled gently from chimneys, and the faint sound of laughter drifted up from the settlement, carried on the evening breeze. "They do not even know we are here," Garrick muttered, a grim smile forming on his face. "They know," Voss said quietly, studying the peaceful scene below with narrowed eyes. Something about it unsettled him, though he could not explain why. No panic, no fleeing wagons, no smoke of an evacuation, only calm, steady life, continuing exactly as it always had. "They should be running," Owen said, voicing the same thought. "Perhaps," Voss replied, "they have chosen not to." As the sun began sinking behind the distant hills, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and violet, the warriors made their way down the slope, their black armor catching the fading light like shards of polished obsidian. And waiting for them at the edge of Bramwell, standing alone in the open field with no weapon in her hand, stood Eleanor Brightwood. She did not run. She did not tremble. She simply waited, her long coat shifting gently in the evening wind, her eyes locked on the approaching warriors, as though she had been expecting this moment for years. General Voss slowed his pace as he neared her, raising a hand once more to halt his warriors several paces behind him. He studied the woman standing before him, searching for fear in her expression, and finding none. "You are either very brave," Voss said, his voice carrying across the quiet field, "or very foolish, to stand alone before 12 warriors of Drakkar." Eleanor tilted her head slightly, a faint, knowing smile touching the corners of her mouth. "Perhaps I am neither, General. Perhaps I simply understand something you do not yet realize. And what would that be? That the greatest battles are rarely won with strength alone," she said, her voice steady, despite the towering presence in front of her. "Walk with me, General Voss. Share a meal with the people of Bramwell before you decide what kind of night this will become. You may find that everything you believe about us is wrong." Behind Voss, his warriors exchanged uneasy glances. This was not the reception any of them had expected. No screaming villagers, no desperate defenses, only a single woman, offering an invitation instead of a fight. Voss stood silently for a long moment, the wind tugging at his cloak, his instincts screaming that something about this entire situation defied everything he understood about warfare. Yet beneath that unease sat a flicker of curiosity, one he could not ignore. "One meal," he finally said, his voice low. "Nothing more." Eleanor's smile widened, just slightly. "One meal," she agreed. "That is all I ask." As the warriors followed her toward the glowing lights of Bramwell, none of them noticed the quiet exchange of glances among the villagers watching from doorways and windows. None of them noticed how carefully every detail of their arrival had already been anticipated. And none of them yet understood that the war they had marched south to fight would not be fought with blades at all, but with something far more difficult to defend against, something that would, in the days to come, change every one of them in ways they could never have imagined. Far behind them, back within the cold stone walls of Drakkar Hold, Councilwoman Alira Thorne stood once again at her window, staring south into the darkness, unable to shake the feeling that the Mountain Kingdom had just made a mistake, far greater than any of them yet understood. Inside the long hall of Bramwell, warm light spilled from lanterns hung along wooden beams, and the smell of roasted bread and simmering stew filled every corner of the room. Long tables had been set with more food than the warriors expected from a settlement of farmers, and villagers moved quietly among them, filling cups with something that smelled faintly of honey and spice. General Edric Voss sat at the head of the largest table, his warriors arranged around him, their armor still fastened, their weapons still within reach. None of them had lowered their guard, though the warmth of the hall and the gentle hum of conversation made it difficult to remain as tense as the mountains had trained them to be. Eleanor Brightwood sat across from Voss, her hands folded calmly on the table. Beside her sat a man named Henry Caldwell, Bramwell's eldest craftsman, and a young woman named Alice Grayson, who had spent years traveling between settlements, trading goods and stories in equal measure. "You must forgive our warriors' silence," Voss said, breaking the quiet that had settled over the table. "It is not our custom to sit at tables with those we have come to conquer." "And yet you sit," Eleanor replied gently, "which tells me something about you that perhaps even you do not yet know." Voss frowned, unsure how to respond. Around him, his warriors shifted uncomfortably, unused to conversation that did not involve orders or battle strategy. Garrick Bellamy, seated near the end of the table, kept glancing toward the doors, expecting an ambush that never came. Nora Whitfield studied the villagers instead, watching how they moved, how they spoke to one another, searching for the trap she was certain must be hidden somewhere in the room. "Tell me," Voss said, leaning forward, "why did you not flee when you learned we were coming? Why did you not gather weapons, or call for aid from neighboring settlements? Every report I have received about your people describes fear at the mere mention of Drakkar warriors." Eleanor considered the question carefully before answering. "Because fear rarely solves anything, General. We learned long ago that running from a storm only delays the moment it catches you. It is far wiser to understand a storm, to learn its patterns, and to find shelter that will actually hold. You speak as though we are a storm to be studied, not warriors to be feared." "Are those two things truly so different?" Eleanor asked, a faint smile touching her lips. Voss said nothing, though something in her words settled uneasily in his chest, a feeling he could not name and did not enjoy. As the evening continued, the warriors found themselves drawn into conversations they had not expected to have. Owen Castellan, the youngest among them, sat near a group of children who had grown curious about his armor, asking question after question about the mountains, about dragons, about whether warriors like him ever grew tired of fighting. He answered carefully at first, then found himself speaking more freely than he intended, describing a childhood spent training from dawn until dusk, with little time left for anything resembling the laughter he now heard echoing around him. Across the hall, Nora found herself seated beside an old woman named Margaret Holloway, who had lived in Bramwell for nearly 70 years. Margaret spoke slowly, her voice weathered but warm, describing decades of harvests, celebrations, losses, and quiet joys that had shaped the settlement into what it was today. "You have fought many battles, I imagine," Margaret said, studying Nora's calm, guarded expression. "More than I can count," Nora replied. "And what have they given you, besides scars?" Nora opened her mouth to answer, then found she had no response. No one had ever asked her that question before. Not once, in all her years of training and combat, had anyone paused to ask what her victories had actually given her, beyond another name added to a growing list of defeated enemies. By the time the meal ended, the warriors were quieter than they had been at its start, though not from exhaustion. Something about the evening had shifted the ground beneath them in a way none of them could easily explain. General Voss rose from his seat, signaling to his warriors that it was time to make camp outside the settlement for the night, as he had promised only one meal, nothing more. Eleanor walked with him to the door, her expression calm as ever. You are welcome to remain within Bramwell tonight, General. There is no need to sleep beneath the open sky when warm beds are available. We do not sleep beneath enemy roofs, Voss said, though his voice lacked its earlier sharpness. Then perhaps, Eleanor replied softly, it is time you consider whether we are truly your enemies at all. Voss did not answer. He simply nodded once and led his warriors out into the cool night air, back toward the edge of the settlement where their camp had been prepared. That night, sleep did not come easily to any of the 12. Garrick lay awake staring at the stars, turning over the strange calm of the evening in his mind, searching for the deception he was certain must be hidden somewhere within it. Nora sat near the dying fire, replaying Margaret's question again and again, unable to find an answer that satisfied her. Owen found himself smiling faintly at the memory of the children's laughter, a sound so different from the sharp commands and clashing steel that had filled his entire life until now. General Voss remained awake longest of all, staring toward the settlement where lantern lights slowly dimmed window by window. He had led warriors into countless conflicts, had faced enemies whose strength could level mountains, and had never once doubted the purpose of his mission. Yet here, in a quiet farming settlement with no visible weapons and no soldiers standing guard, doubt had found a way to slip past every defense he had built over decades of service. Morning arrived with a soft golden light spreading across the valley, and Voss gathered his warriors early, determined to press forward with the mission the council had given him. Yet as they prepared to march deeper into human territory, Eleanor appeared once more at the edge of the settlement, this time accompanied by several others, including Henry Caldwell and a tall, quiet man named William Ashby, who carried himself with the calm confidence of someone who had negotiated far more dangerous conversations than this one. General Voss, Eleanor said, before you continue your march, I would ask for one more day. We have already given you one evening, Voss replied. My orders are clear. We are to advance and ensure the human settlements understand the boundaries set by Drakkar Hold. And you will still be able to carry out those orders tomorrow, Eleanor said calmly. But today, I would like to show you something that may change how you understand this entire mission. If, after seeing it, you still wish to advance with force, I will not stand in your way. Voss studied her closely, searching for any sign of trickery, yet finding only calm sincerity in her expression. Behind him, his warriors waited silently, several of them exchanging uncertain glances, none of them eager to admit how curious they too had become. One day, Voss finally said, nothing more. Eleanor nodded, satisfied. That is all I ask, General. Follow me. She led the warriors not toward the settlement, but along a winding path that curved through fields and forests, toward a wide clearing, overlooking the valley below. As they walked, Eleanor spoke quietly about the history of the human lands, describing settlements that had once fought endless wars among themselves before learning, through great loss, that survival depended on cooperation rather than conquest. We were not always as calm as you found us last night, she admitted. There was a time when our own leaders behaved much as yours do now, believing strength alone could solve every conflict. It nearly destroyed everything we had built. And what changed? Owen asked, unable to hold back his curiosity. We learned to listen before we chose to fight, Eleanor replied. It is a simple lesson, yet one of the hardest to truly master. When they reached the clearing, Eleanor gestured toward the valley spread out below them, where several settlements could be seen scattered across the landscape, connected by winding roads and shared fields. This is what unity built, General, not through the strength of a single warrior, but through generations choosing understanding over conquest. I do not ask you to abandon your strength. I only ask you to consider whether strength alone has ever truly solved a lasting problem. Voss stood silently, staring out across the peaceful valley, the weight of her words settling heavily upon him. For the first time since leaving Drakkar Hold, he found himself uncertain of the mission he had been so confident in only days earlier. Behind him, his warriors stood equally silent, each of them wrestling with thoughts they had never expected to carry into what was supposed to be a simple, swift campaign against a supposedly weaker enemy. None of them yet realized that this quiet, peaceful valley would become the place where everything they once believed about strength, victory, and purpose would begin to unravel completely. 3 weeks passed, and no word arrived from General Voss or his warriors. At Drakkar Hold, the silence stretched longer than any mission in living memory, and the council grew increasingly restless with each passing night. Councilwoman Alira Thorne watched the southern road every evening from her window, waiting for riders who never appeared, dreading news she feared might never come at all. Finally, the council could wait no longer. A second party was assembled, smaller than the first, made up of 6 scouts trained not for combat, but for tracking and observation. Their leader, a sharp-eyed woman named Charlotte Bain, had spent years studying the movements of both mountain creatures and distant travelers, and she accepted the mission with a grim sense of duty rather than confidence. "Find them," Alira told her before she departed, standing at the gate in the cold morning air. "Find out what happened, and return with the truth, whatever it may be." "And if the truth is worse than we imagine?" Charlotte asked. "Then we will need it more than ever," Alira replied. The scouts traveled swiftly along the same southern road the 12 warriors had taken weeks before, following faint signs of their passage through forests and valleys. On the 5th day, they crested the same hill overlooking Bramwell, expecting to find a battlefield, or perhaps a settlement reduced to ashes and ruin. Instead, they found a peaceful, thriving valley, with smoke curling gently from chimneys and fields swaying beneath a calm afternoon breeze. No signs of destruction, no scattered weapons, no indication that a conflict of any kind had taken place. "This cannot be right," muttered a scout named Daniel Fairweather, lowering the spyglass from his eye. "There is no war here. There is nothing here at all." Charlotte studied the valley for a long moment before finally speaking. "Then perhaps the battle they fought was not the kind we expected." They approached the settlement cautiously, weapons ready, uncertain what to expect from a people rumored to have somehow overcome 12 of Drakkar's greatest warriors, without leaving behind any trace of conflict. Yet as they neared the edge of Bramwell, they were met not with hostility, but with the same calm hospitality that had greeted the original 12 weeks earlier. Eleanor Brightwood emerged once again to meet them, her expression neither surprised nor guarded. "I wondered how long it would take before more of you arrived," she said. "Where are they?" Charlotte demanded, her hand tightening around the hilt of her blade. "Where is General Voss and his warriors? What have you done with them?" "They are safe," Eleanor replied simply. "Come inside, and I will explain everything I can." Charlotte hesitated, torn between suspicion and desperate need for answers. Finally, she nodded, and the scouts followed Eleanor into the settlement, their guards raised even as curious villagers watched them pass with quiet, familiar calm, as though they had seen warriors arrive at their gates many times before. Inside the long hall, Eleanor gestured for the scouts to sit, though none of them lowered their weapons entirely. She poured warm tea into simple clay cups, her movements calm and deliberate, giving the scouts time to settle before she began to speak. "Your General Voss and his warriors did not fall in battle," she said. "No blood was spilled here, and none of your people were harmed in any way. What happened to them is far more complicated than a simple defeat." "Explain," Charlotte said, her voice tight with barely controlled tension. Eleanor folded her hands on the table, choosing her words carefully. "When your warriors arrived, we did not meet them with weapons, because we understood something your leaders perhaps did not. Strength against strength only ever produces destruction on both sides. So instead, we offered them something they had never truly been given before, not by their own people, and certainly not by an enemy they expected to fight." "And what was that?" asked Daniel, leaning forward despite his suspicion. "Understanding," Eleanor said simply. "We listened to them. We asked about their lives, their fears, their purpose, beyond the missions they were given. Many of them, we discovered, had spent their entire lives being shaped into weapons, long before they were ever given a choice in the matter. We did not conquer your warriors, Scout. We simply showed them a version of life they had never been allowed to imagine." Charlotte's grip on her blade loosened slightly, though confusion and disbelief still clouded her expression. "You are saying they chose to stay? Willingly?" "Some of them, yes," Eleanor admitted. "Others are still deciding. It is not a simple choice, especially for those raised believing that loyalty to their homeland was the only purpose worth living for." "This is madness," Charlotte said, shaking her head. Warriors of Drakkar do not simply abandon their duty because a settlement offered them tea and kind words. Eleanor's expression remained patient, though a note of quiet firmness entered her voice. Then perhaps you should speak with them yourself, before deciding what is and is not possible. She led the scouts through the settlement, past fields where several familiar figures could be seen working alongside Bramwell's farmers, their black armor replaced with simple, practical clothing suited to daily life rather than combat. Charlotte's breath caught as she recognized Garrick Bellamy among them, his sleeves rolled up, his hands dusted with soil, as he helped repair a wooden fence alongside a group of local villagers. "Garrick!" she called out, her voice sharp with disbelief. He turned, startled at first, then offered a small, uncertain smile. "Charlotte, I wondered if the council would send someone eventually." "What happened to you?" she demanded, closing the distance between them. "Where is General Voss? Where are the others?" Garrick set down the tools he had been using and wiped his hands against his trousers, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "Nothing happened to me, Charlotte. Not in the way you are imagining. I am simply reconsidering things I never had the chance to question before." "Reconsidering your duty? Your oath to Drakkar Hold? My duty was decided for me, before I was even old enough to understand what an oath truly meant," Garrick said quietly. "I have spent my entire life fighting battles chosen by others, believing without question that strength was the only measure of worth. Here, for the first time, I have been given the chance to decide who I wish to become, rather than simply becoming what I was trained to be." Charlotte stared at him, searching for signs of deception, of some hidden trap woven into his words. Yet all she found was a calm sincerity that unsettled her far more than any battle ever could. "And General Voss?" she asked finally. "Does he share this same reconsideration?" Garrick's expression grew more serious. "He has said very little since we arrived. He spends most of his time near the river, alone. I believe this has been more difficult for him than any of us, given how deeply he believed in our original mission." Charlotte turned to Eleanor, desperation creeping into her voice despite her best efforts to remain composed. "Take me to him. Now." Eleanor nodded and led the group toward the river's edge, where General Voss sat alone on a large flat stone, staring silently at the slow-moving water. His armor, though still worn, seemed heavier upon him now, as though the weight of uncertainty had settled into every joint and plate. "General," Charlotte said, approaching carefully, "the council sent us to find you, to bring you home." Voss did not turn immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the commanding certainty Charlotte remembered from before his departure. "Home," he repeated softly. "I am no longer certain what that word truly means." "You have a duty to Drakkar Hold," Charlotte insisted. "Your warriors have a duty. This settlement has clearly used some manner of deception to weaken your resolve, and it is our responsibility to correct that before further harm is done." Voss finally turned to face her, his eyes tired but sharp with a clarity she had never seen in him before. "No deception was used, Charlotte. No illusion, no trickery, only conversation, and time to think about questions I had spent my entire life avoiding." "What questions?" "Whether the strength I dedicated my life to ever truly served a purpose beyond feeding the pride of those who sent me to use it," Voss said quietly. "Whether every battle I won ever actually solved anything, or whether it simply delayed a deeper problem none of us were ever brave enough to address." Charlotte fell silent, unsure how to respond to a version of General Voss she barely recognized. This was not the confident commander who had marched from Drakkar Hold weeks earlier, certain of victory and unwavering in his purpose. This was someone changed, someone reshaped not through defeat, but through reflection he had never before been given the chance to experience. "The council will not accept this," she finally said. "They will see this as a failure, as weakness." "Perhaps," Voss said, "or perhaps they will finally be forced to ask themselves the same questions I have been asking myself these past weeks. Questions about what strength is truly meant to serve, and whether conquest was ever the answer we believed it to be." Charlotte studied him for a long moment, torn between duty and the undeniable change she witnessed in front of her. Finally she turned to Eleanor, her voice quieter now, less certain than before. "What happens now?" "That depends on what each of them decides," Eleanor said gently. Some may choose to return to Drakkar Hold, carrying with them a different understanding of what they experienced here. Others may choose to remain, having found something here they were never given the chance to seek before. Either way, the choice belongs to them now, not to orders given from a distance. Charlotte looked around at the peaceful settlements surrounding her, at warriors who had once been feared across the land, now walking freely among farmers and craftsmen, their armor set aside, their expressions carrying a calm she had never associated with Drakkar's fiercest fighters. She realized, with a growing unease, that whatever report she carried back to the council would not describe a battle lost through weakness, but something far more difficult to explain, and far more dangerous to the beliefs their entire society had been built upon. As the sun began to set over the valley, casting long golden shadows across the fields, Charlotte understood that the true battle had never been fought with weapons at all. It had been fought quietly, patiently, through conversations and questions that no warrior, however skilled, had ever been trained to defend against. And as she prepared to return north with news that would shake the very foundation of Drakkar Hold, she could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger reckoning still to come. Charlotte Bain returned to Drakkar Hold 10 days later, her scouting party weary from the journey, her mind still turning over everything she had witnessed in the valley. The gates opened for her at dusk, torches lighting her path as she made her way directly to the council chamber, where Elira Thorne waited with the rest of the council, their faces tense with anticipation. "Tell us everything," Elira said the moment Charlotte entered the room. "Where is General Voss? Where are the others?" Charlotte stood before the council, choosing her words carefully, aware that what she was about to say would sound impossible to those who had never witnessed it themselves. "They are alive," she began. "All 12 of them, unharmed, but they have not been defeated in the way any of us imagined." A murmur spread through the chamber, confusion mixing with relief and disbelief in equal measure. A council member named Percival Ashgrove, one of the strongest supporters of the original mission, leaned forward sharply. "Unharmed? Then why have they not returned? Why has General Voss not sent word himself?" "Because he is no longer certain he wishes to return," Charlotte said quietly. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Elira's expression shifted from confusion to something closer to dread, as though she had feared this exact possibility since the night the warriors first departed. "Explain," Elira said, her voice steady, despite the tension gripping the room. Charlotte described everything she had witnessed: the peaceful settlement, the warriors working freely among the villagers, the long conversations that had reshaped their understanding of duty, strength, and purpose. She spoke of Garrick tending fields alongside farmers, of General Voss sitting alone by the river, questioning beliefs he had carried his entire life. She spoke of Eleanor Brightwood, the calm, patient woman who had apparently done more to dismantle the confidence of Drakkar's greatest warriors than any army ever could. When she finished, the chamber remained silent for a long moment before Percival rose sharply to his feet, his voice tight with anger. "This is unacceptable! Our warriors have been manipulated, weakened by clever words and false kindness. We must send a larger force immediately, one strong enough to correct this situation and bring our people home by whatever means necessary." "And what if force only pushes them further away?" Charlotte asked. "What if the very thing you propose only proves everything they have begun to question about the way our warriors are treated?" "They are Drakkar warriors," Percival snapped. "Their duty is not a matter for personal reflection. It is a matter of loyalty to their home and their people. Perhaps that is exactly the belief that led us here in the first place," said a quieter voice from the back of the chamber. All eyes turned toward a young council member named Thea Marlowe, who had said little throughout the meeting until now. She rose slowly, her voice steady despite her youth among a council filled with far older, more experienced voices. "We have always measured our warriors by their victories," Thea continued. "We have never once asked what those victories cost them, or whether they were ever given a choice in the lives we shaped for them. Perhaps General Voss and the others are not lost to us because of trickery. Perhaps they are lost to us because, for the first time, someone finally asked them what they truly wanted." Percival's face reddened with frustration. "This is exactly the kind of thinking that has weakened our warriors' resolve. We cannot allow sentiment to undo generations of strength and tradition." And yet, Illyra said quietly, silencing the growing argument. Strength and tradition sent 12 of our finest warriors south, and not one of them has chosen to return unchanged. Perhaps it is time we consider whether the tradition itself carries a flaw we have long refused to examine. The chamber fell into uneasy silence once more, the weight of Illyra's words settling over the gathered council. For the first time since the warrior's departure, doubt had entered the room not as a whisper, but as a serious question demanding an answer. Over the following days, the council remained divided. Percival and several older members continued pushing for a larger force to be sent south, determined to reclaim what they viewed as Drakar's stolen warriors and restore the kingdom's damaged pride. Others, led quietly by Thea and Illyra, argued for patience, suggesting that force would only confirm the very criticisms Eleanor Brightwood had apparently raised, and risk losing far more than 12 warriors if the situation escalated into open conflict. Meanwhile, unrest began spreading beyond the council chamber. Younger warriors training within Drakar Hold's great halls had begun hearing fragments of Charlotte's report, whispered between guards and servants who had overheard the council's heated debates. For many of these young fighters, raised on stories of unstoppable Drakar strength, the idea that their greatest warriors might have chosen a different life entirely was both unsettling and, for some, quietly fascinating. A young trainee named Simon Hartley found himself unable to stop thinking about the story. After overhearing it from an older guard, Simon had spent years training under harsh instructors who insisted that hesitation, curiosity, and gentleness were weaknesses to be trained out of every warrior long before they ever saw battle. Yet if warriors as accomplished as Garrick Bellamy and General Voss himself had found reason to question that very philosophy, Simon began to wonder whether the foundation of everything he had been taught was truly as unshakable as he once believed. He was not alone in this quiet questioning. Across the training halls, small conversations began forming among the younger generation, conversations held carefully, away from the ears of instructors who might view such curiosity as dangerous disobedience. A divide was forming within Drakar Hold itself, one that mirrored the very split occurring within its council chamber. 10 days after Charlotte's return, General Voss himself arrived at the gates of Drakar Hold, alone, having chosen to make the journey north without the rest of his warriors. Word of his arrival spread rapidly through the stronghold, drawing crowds of curious onlookers who lined the paths leading toward the Great Hall, eager to see the legendary general, who had vanished for weeks under such strange circumstances. Voss walked calmly through the gathered crowd, his expression unreadable, his presence carrying none of the commanding authority he once displayed so effortlessly. He made his way directly to the council chamber, where Illyra, Percival, Thea, and the rest of the council waited anxiously for his arrival. "General Voss," Illyra said, rising to greet him, "we feared we might never see you again." "I considered that possibility myself," Voss admitted, taking a slow breath before continuing. "But I realized that whatever choice I make regarding my own future, this council deserves to hear the truth directly from me, rather than through second-hand reports, however accurate they may have been." Percival stepped forward immediately, his frustration barely contained. "Then tell us plainly, General, have you abandoned your duty to Drakar Hold? Have you turned against everything you once swore to protect?" Voss met his gaze steadily, his voice calm despite the sharpness of the accusation. "I have not turned against Drakar Hold, Percival, but I have come to understand that the mission we were given was built upon assumptions none of us ever truly examined. We believed strength alone determined worth. We believed conquest was the only measure of victory. I have spent these past weeks learning that neither belief holds as much truth as we once assumed." "So you intend to abandon us," Percival said bitterly, "to choose farmers and diplomats over your own people?" "I intend," Voss said firmly, "to help this council understand something it desperately needs to understand, before further warriors are sent south to face the very same reckoning I have already faced. Not through weapons, Percival, through truth, and I believe it is a truth this hold has needed to hear for a very long time." The chamber fell silent, every council member turning their attention fully toward the general, who had once embodied everything their society valued most, now standing before them as someone transformed by an experience none of them yet fully understood. Illyra studied him carefully, searching for any trace of the confident, unwavering commander who had departed weeks earlier. What she found instead was someone quieter, more thoughtful, carrying a weight of understanding that seemed to have replaced his former certainty entirely. "Then tell us, General," she said softly. "Tell us everything you have learned, and let this council decide, together, what kind of future we truly wish to build." Voss nodded slowly, drawing a deep breath, as the weight of what he was about to share settled fully upon him. And as the candles burned low around the chamber, casting long shadows across walls lined with centuries of Drakkar history, General Edric Voss began to speak, not as a warrior delivering a report, but as a man finally ready to challenge the very foundation of everything his people had always believed about strength, purpose, and the true meaning of victory. General Voss spoke for nearly 2 hours that night, describing every detail of his time in Bramwell, from the first quiet meal shared with Eleanor Brightwood, to the long, difficult conversations that had slowly unraveled beliefs he once considered unshakable. He spoke of watching Garrick Bellamy laugh freely for the first time in years, while helping repair a fence. He spoke of Owen Castellan sitting among children, answering questions about dragons and mountains, with a gentleness none of his instructors had ever encouraged him to show. He spoke of Nora Whitfield, who had spent an entire evening simply listening to an elderly woman describe a life built not on conquest, but on community. "We were never given the chance to ask what we truly wanted," Voss said, his voice steady, despite the weight of his words. "From the moment we were born into this hold, our paths were decided for us. Strength was demanded before kindness was ever offered. Victory was celebrated while questions were discouraged. I do not say this to condemn Drakkarhold entirely, but to ask this council honestly, have we ever once considered whether our warriors deserved the chance to choose their own purpose, rather than simply inheriting ours?" Percival remained unconvinced, arguing late into the night that tradition existed precisely because it had kept Drakkarhold strong and unified for generations. Yet even as he argued, Charlotte noticed how his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty, as though Voss's words had planted a doubt even within someone determined to resist it. Thea, meanwhile, listened intently, nodding slowly as pieces of a puzzle she had long sensed but never fully understood began falling into place. "Perhaps," she finally said, once Voss had finished speaking, "our strength was never truly in question during this mission. Perhaps what was truly tested was whether our warriors were given the chance to become more than weapons, and whether we, as their leaders, were brave enough to allow that transformation to happen." Elira remained silent for a long moment, staring at the flickering candlelight, before finally speaking. "General Voss, do you intend to return to Bramwell?" Voss considered the question carefully before answering. "I do not yet know, Elira. Part of me feels a duty to remain here, to help guide this council toward a wiser path forward. But another part of me has found something in that valley I never thought possible, a sense of peace I did not know I was missing until I experienced it. Whatever I decide, I believe the more important question is not where I choose to stand, but what kind of future this council chooses to build for every warrior who comes after me." That question lingered over Drakkarhold in the days that followed, spreading beyond the council chamber into every corner of the stronghold. Young trainees like Simon Hartley found themselves engaging in longer, more thoughtful conversations with their instructors, some of whom, surprisingly, welcomed the questions rather than dismissing them as disobedience. Older warriors who had spent decades believing strength alone defined their worth began quietly reflecting on lives spent chasing victories that had never truly brought them the fulfillment they once assumed such triumphs would provide. Meanwhile, in Bramwell, life continued at its steady, peaceful pace, though the settlement had changed in subtle ways since the arrival of the 12 warriors weeks earlier. Garrick had taken on a permanent role helping maintain the settlement's fences and buildings, his broad shoulders now more accustomed to carrying tools than weapons. Owen had begun assisting the local teacher, sharing stories of the mountains with children who listened wide-eyed, fascinated by tales of a world so different from their own quiet valley. Nora had grown close with Margaret Holloway, spending long afternoons learning about the settlement's history, discovering a curiosity about life beyond battle that she had never known she possessed. Eleanor Brightwood watched these changes unfold with quiet satisfaction, though she remained careful never to claim credit for choices that ultimately belonged to each warrior individually. "We did not defeat them," she explained one evening to a visiting trader, curious about the rumors spreading across the region. We simply offered them room to breathe, and the freedom to decide who they truly wished to become. What they built from that freedom was entirely their own doing. 2 months after Charlotte's initial report, General Voss made his decision. He requested one final audience with the council, this time joined by Alira, Thea, and, somewhat reluctantly, Percival, who had softened considerably since their earlier confrontation, though pride still colored much of his demeanor. "I have decided to return to Bramwell," Voss announced, his voice calm and certain, in a way that echoed his old confidence, though now shaped by a very different understanding of purpose. Not as a warrior sent to conquer, but as someone who wishes to help build a bridge between our two peoples. I believe there is much Drakkar Hold could learn from the valley, just as I believe there may be things we could offer them in return, should mutual respect ever replace old fears. Alira nodded slowly, having anticipated this outcome for some time. "And what of the council, General? What do you propose we do moving forward?" Voss glanced toward Thea before answering, a silent acknowledgement of the role she had played in shifting the council's thinking over the past several weeks. "I propose we send no more warriors south with weapons drawn. Instead, let us send emissaries, willing to listen as much as they speak. Let us learn from Bramwell's example, rather than assuming our strength alone gives us the right to dictate how others should live." Percival remained quiet for a long moment before finally speaking, his voice carrying a reluctant but genuine shift in tone. "I still believe strength holds value, General, but perhaps I have spent too long believing it was the only value worth pursuing. If what you say is true, and our warriors have truly found something meaningful in that valley, then perhaps it is time this council learns to value more than victories won through force." It was, for Percival, as close to agreement as anyone in the chamber had expected, and Alira allowed herself a small, relieved smile at hearing it. Within weeks, a new kind of expedition departed from Drakkar Hold, not an army marching toward conquest, but a small group of chosen representatives, including Thea herself, traveling south toward Bramwell with intentions of establishing a formal exchange between the two peoples. They carried no weapons drawn, no demands prepared, only a genuine desire to understand a settlement that had achieved something no army in Drakkar's long history had ever managed, changing the hearts of 12 of its greatest warriors without a single act of violence. When the group arrived in Bramwell, Eleanor greeted them personally, along with Garrick, Nora, and Owen, all three now comfortably settled into lives that looked nothing like the ones they had once lived within Drakkar Hold's stone walls. General Voss stood among them as well, having already returned days earlier, his presence now serving as a quiet bridge between the world he had left and the one he had chosen to embrace. "I did not expect to see representatives from Drakkar Hold arrive without armor," Eleanor said warmly, greeting Thea with a respectful nod. "Times are changing," Thea replied, glancing toward Voss and the others with quiet admiration. Slowly, perhaps, but changing nonetheless. Over the following months, a careful, evolving relationship began forming between Drakkar Hold and the human settlements scattered throughout the southern valleys. It was not without difficulty. Old habits and old fears did not disappear overnight, and disagreements arose often as both peoples navigated a relationship built on understanding rather than dominance. Yet slowly, trade routes opened, knowledge was exchanged, warriors and farmers, scholars and soldiers, began learning from one another in ways neither society had ever previously considered possible. Back within the Great Hall of Drakkar Hold, the old warrior code that had once demanded unquestioning strength and unwavering conquest was quietly revised, shaped now by lessons learned not through defeat on a battlefield, but through the quiet, patient wisdom of a settlement that had never once needed to draw a weapon to change everything. Young trainees like Simon Hartley grew into warriors far different from those who had marched south under General Voss's original command, warriors trained not only in strength and discipline, but in patience, empathy, and the understanding that true strength often revealed itself most clearly in moments of restraint rather than conflict. Years later, when new generations asked about the legendary mission where 12 of Drakkar's mightiest warriors marched south, and none of them returned in the way they had left, the story was no longer told as a tale of defeat or humiliation. Instead, it became a story passed down as one of transformation, A reminder that the greatest victories were not always won through conquest, but sometimes through the courage to question everything a person had once believed unshakable. Eleanor Brightwood lived out the remainder of her years in Bramwell, watching the quiet valley she had helped protect grow into a place known not for its fear of Drakkar Hold, but for the unlikely friendship that had blossomed between two peoples who once stood ready for conflict, choosing instead a path few could have predicted on that first misty night, when 12 warriors marched south, certain of victory, and returned instead with something far greater than any battle could have ever given them. And so, deep within the mountains, and far across the golden valleys below, both peoples carried forward a lesson neither would ever forget, that true strength was never truly measured by the ability to conquer, but by the courage to understand, to listen, and to choose a better path forward, even when every tradition insisted otherwise.